This is an important distinction for me and something that I'm definitely looking for guidance on. Eric, you mentioned at the outset about healthy boundaries. I've experienced what were presented as boundaries, but were actually a way of that person remaining sort of the, having the primacy in the relationship. It was a form of covert narcissism, and it was actually I have a boundary, and that means you guys can't do this. So, can somebody talk to me about that and our listeners, obviously?
I think what you hit on there is the difference of having a healthy boundary or putting rules into your life and special rules for other people. And Erica said it, there are rules to control other people. That's not a boundary. And I think this is the big distinction between the two. It wasn't a boundary in the first place. They may have called it a boundary, but it was a rule set to control the other person. And my boundary is not to respond to that. If somebody has a rule book for me, I don't even have a rule book for myself. So I certainly don't respond to a rule book to another person.
My response to that attempt at somebody trying to tell me how I'm going to behave in order for them to be okay is really sorry you feel that way. What are we going to, I don't know what to tell you, but if we're sharing space or something, right, and you're trying to tell me this is how it's going to be, then I don't know what to tell you. I'm certainly not going to go out of my way to try to overstep what you're calling a boundary, but I'm definitely not going to manage myself to fit into your idea of what you think you need. I don't know what to tell you. We all need to manage our own tensions. Going back to our last episode, that sounds like a you problem and not a me problem. Sorry you feel that way.
This feels to me like an advanced level of boundary understanding, given that I said at the outset, boundaries are relatively new to me. I am beginning to understand some of the theory, but this line of that's you imposing a rule or attempting to, which gives me judders and makes me feel like I might suddenly develop oppositional disorder, whatever it's called. Um, or, oh, I don't, is that an acceptable boundary? Ooh, and suddenly I'm like, zippy. That's a reference only the British will get, and like, ooh. Um, and you don't know what to do. So, any thoughts on that? Go on, Marcella.
Yeah, I just want to share what Erica said earlier. A boundary is if you're late, I'm leaving. That's a boundary because boundaries have everything to do with you, your actions, not the other person. So if somebody's saying, well, if you want to hang out with me, you have to do this, and this, it's not a boundary. That's a rule they're trying to control you versus, well, if this comes up, if you do this, then for me to be safe or for me to be okay with it, this is what I have to do. So it has nothing to do with the person because everybody controls their own actions, right? And you control yours, you control your response. So it's kind of like, well, okay, if this happens, then this is what I'm going to do to be okay with it, to be okay with it. And that's how I view it. It's like, what do I need to do to be okay with the other person's response or whatever the other person is doing? Because we can't control anybody else. The only person we can control is ourselves. So what do I need to do to be okay? And it might be leaving the situation, you know? But how am I going to deal with it?
Yeah, Marcella, I'm absolutely with you there. I have left past relationships because there was no communication. And I think this is the big difference as well. In a good relationship, you can actually have we're back to communication. You can have a conversation about what's okay with you, what's okay with me, and how are we going to live together and work with each other and be with each other, right? It's also accepting another person's boundary or what's okay with them for them. If that's not possible and you just get a rule set and it's either my way or the highway, well, guess what? I have always chosen the highway because if I cannot have a conversation with you and we cannot talk to each other, what's the point? That's not a relationship. That's a dictatorship.
It makes me wonder how many people, and I would love to see some response in the comments on this one, have ever actually sat down and thought it's not okay for me if something. Marcella gave the thing with the hug, and I imagine there's probably quite a few children being educated that they don't have to hug people if they don't want to. It's okay to say no to that sort of thing. But we probably have never been encouraged. I was certainly never encouraged to say to anybody what is not okay with me. Childhood experience was you do as you're told, and actually a bit of a you are here to make things easier for me. I would probably benefit, and I may do this, and I might encourage our viewers and listeners to actually just sit at some point, without agenda, and just ask yourself, what is it not okay for me to experience? And there, for me, will lay the start of some boundaries that would be useful for me.
So I think the first step, right? Because that feels really like broad, right? What is it okay for me to not accept? It depends. Like in relation to what is my next question, right? So maybe the backdoor way to kind of get clear on where you need to set a healthy boundary could be paying attention to areas or people that are connected to having you feel angry, resentful, frustrated, exhausted, right? Where are the things that are causing me to feel those things? And take a look at that, because that's usually an indication of where there's not a healthy boundary is non-existing for you. So maybe that's a back way to get to what it is you need and what you're not going to accept in situations or from people. Because that's always the way it works for me. If I'm doing something or engaged in something or something's happening, whether I'm at work or whatever it is, and I'm because like we said and Marcella said, it's about me. It's got nothing to do with the external that's happening because I can't control that. So if I'm feeling annoyed or sad or frustrated or pissed or whatever it is, I have to follow that and be like, well, what is that? And what is that about? Okay, because he or she or whatever is what it is, but what am I allowing to happen that's causing me to feel this way? Because when you have a healthy boundary, you're virtually unaffected by anything anybody else is doing. It doesn't matter. I don't care.
And I appreciate that kind of twist to a well-formed outcome. We would encourage people if we were in a coaching relationship not to be too broad or ambiguous or vague. So tapping into that, okay, this causes me to feel some resentment, some anger, some shame. It could be any number of whatever the emotion is. Okay, why? What purpose is that serving? And then you can actually ask yourself whether that's something that somebody has put on you, in which case it brings us back to it's not a boundary, it's somebody else's rule, ultimately allowing you to drill down to, you know what, I really don't like it when people waste my time. My boundary is if you're a second late, I'm gone, using the example of being on time. I'm one of those people that if you're 5 minutes early, you're 10 minutes late. But that's my thing. If other people come in and they're bang on time, I've got no reason or grounds to think you're late, you're not reliable. No, you were perfectly on time. So that's my boundary. I like people to be perfectly on time. You don't have to be 15 minutes early, because that's something I'm then trying to impose on other people.
So this is a good example, right? Because unless you communicate that, like Gabby, back to Gabby, everything's communication. So the scripting of that boundary would be, look, I like, again, please be on time. And when I say on time, I mean be on time, like exactly at 12, or I'm going to carry on without you, right? Let me know if you think you're going to be late. I'd appreciate the heads up so I know how to navigate. You got to let people know, right? Because most people, like, I would never know. Who knows? Who's going to know that Alec is a guy who wants it to be on time, right? So the rigidity comes in where you don't communicate that and you just leave without letting, like, oh shit, I was here on time, but you left. Like, what is that? And there's the tension. Back to our last episode, there goes the tension. So it's all about scripting the boundary in a way that isn't I'm not dictating to you what you need to do. I'm just making a statement about what is in fact true for me.
This is actually a really good example because it brings us back to the flexibility and the gate we were talking to about on the very start. I live in Ireland, right? And I'm from Germany. And in Germany, it's the same. When I was working, to be in time was being there 15 minutes early, then you were in time. If you were on time, you were late, right? Coming to Ireland, where people meet at 6-ish, it was a different culture. So that was something I could not hold up as a boundary, or because that would have become a rule which is not practical in a country where people are very flexible and very fluid. So that gate for me is, yeah, if you're 10, 15 minutes late, it's still on time in Ireland, and I have to accept that, right? And it's okay. And by now I actually love it because it reduces stress when something happens, right? Now, if somebody isn't there after 40 minutes, that's a different story because that's that's too far. The pendulum goes too far in the other direction there. But that's where flexibility comes in as well,
Yeah.
because sometimes we might think of a boundary, but is it actually a practical boundary? Or does it slightly go into this keeping a rule book again instead of a code of conduct for ourselves, that handbook, right?
I'd like to piggyback on you, Gabby, because and something that Erica said. So, I'm married and I am very time conscious, very time conscious. I mean, if you are, well, this is how I used to be. If you're like 3 minutes late, I have an attitude, right? That's how I used to roll. So with my husband, who's not time conscious at all, I would have an attitude all the time, right? So the boundary is, how can I make this better for me? So I know that he's late all the time. So I've just gotten used to him being late. And normally, even when he's late, it always works out. We always, it's no kind of like external repercussion. So I'm like, okay, I had to deal with myself and be like, okay, this is his personality. And you can't be pissed off all the time when we go somewhere, or say, like Erika said, leaving, because I'd be by myself all the time, really. So if I am with a client, I expect them to be on time, and I might give them 10 minutes of grace, but then I'm gone. So it's that gate, and as well as, who are you dealing with?
Mm.
Because I'm still very time conscious, and I feel disrespected if you don't respect my time.
You make me think of the way of the Tao, which is spelled Tao, and it's a bit of Newtonian physics, although that theory came along later. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So if you've got a pendulum and you drop it from up here, it's going to swing that far that way. So what we actually want, and it fits with this ever recurring theme of awareness and communication, is the balance. That what I really want is to be aligned. I don't want my pendulum swinging too far one way or the other. And Erika said about using, and I'm paraphrasing here, using our emotional alignment to recognize where a boundary is being pressed upon. So, what I'm picking up from this whole conversation is that I aim to keep myself balanced, which means not putting time pressures on myself or making the allowances that Marcella has just spoken about, and not being at all manipulative like I was when Erika and Brett were here to go to Scotland and saying we need to be on the road at this time, and having made it half an hour different to when we actually needed to be on the road so that we set off at the time that I wanted to. So with that, that little
I don't, that's not
graph,
manipulative though. Like you putting such a negative spin on it, to me, that's you taking care of what you need to for yourself. Like, you know, meaning you, need to know. I know we need to be on the road by this time. We have no clue what that is. We couldn't estimate how long, whatever, because we're new to your country. And also, you don't know how we operate in getting ready. So you were just taking care of yourself by saying, I'm padding the time here so that I'm not carrying the stress, since I'm solely responsible for getting us where we need to go. I don't see that as manipulation at all. I'm establishing what I need, and I'm going to tell you what I need because we didn't know any different anyway. So that was your boundary. That was fine, totally fine, and we were on time because of it.
oh, I'm getting better at boundaries. Let's have some closing wisdom from everybody.
You didn't even talk about the pool.
Yeah, another time.
I was looking forward to that. I'm like, they didn't talk about the pool, but another time. Well, since I'm talking, I might as well give my closing statements. It's interesting. I love the conversation about boundaries, but I want to share, Alec, you brought something up in my mind that, I was telling you the story about the difference between my husband and I, right? So that's what I do actually. If I know we need to be someplace at a certain time, I'll say, we need to leave a half an hour earlier because I am the planner too. So I love planning stuff. And so that's what I do when I know we need to be there at a certain time. Boundaries. I think that for me, as well as everybody else, that boundaries are a necessity to live a life that you enjoy. Because if you don't have boundaries, you're always like Erika said, you're always going to be pissed off or, angst or any of the emotions until you deal with the introspection and figure out why you're like that and create a boundary. And remember, a boundary is not a wall, it's a gate so that you can effectively deal with uh, people and communicate properly your needs to people.
I will say this, the gate is really important. And when it does come to the pool, right, I have my boundaries and I am flexible because I choose to, because I know the person on the other side and I know what their needs are and where they're going with it. But it doesn't mean that I have to run around like a crazy person or any of that stuff, right? It's at my pace and how I want to do it because I made a boundary and said what I was not going to do, and here I'm doing it. So I don't want to hear boo about how I do it, right? I'm doing what I said I wasn't going to and supporting, right? So it may be crossing a boundary, but yet I'm still supporting somebody I care for in completion of something that they're looking to get done, a task. So I there's that gate. And I love that term, the gate. The gate is really a great picture in boundaries. So thank you for the gate.
Before I tell you my closing statement, just a nice little story for I hope everybody finds funny who's listening. Marcella and Alec, I have friends in Ireland for even for Irish people, they're extreme. Even other Irish people find it extreme. They're always at least an hour late. Always, right? So we did start doing exactly the same. If we needed to be somewhere at 3, we told them to be there at 2. That worked until one day they actually came on time and they arrived and nobody was there. They were like, where are you all guys? And we had to admit to them what we were all doing. But you know what? They were so taken aback by it that they actually started to be on time, or they're usually 15, 20 minutes out. Like, so yeah, that's, I thought it was just very funny. They literally arrived and nobody was there. For me,
Running late.
yeah, for me, the boundaries, I think it's the flexibility to question myself all the time. Is it still a healthy boundary? Or are my boundaries becoming rules where I even start restricting other people, especially in a relationship? And Erika had it really nicely. It's different. You know, boundaries can be flexible depending on the person, can be different on the situation. So as long I'm okay and I don't have those frustrations or resentments where I feel now the boundaries are pushed, my boundaries are very, very flexible. And it's really, really important to me because sometimes I have to bend my boundaries as well to, as Brett said, to help other people. You know, other people have different needs and boundaries. So it's also about the communication and working with each other and finding a way where we can actually find a kind of a common base, how to work with each other and with our boundaries on both sides. So for me, this is the one thing because I have the thing about rules. A boundary never can be a rule. It needs to be a flexible, this is as far as I go, and I won't step over that line. And here's the gate. When you need something, I will step then over it.
Erika, did you go?
I did not. I'm just listening. Boundaries, I think, are one of my favorite things to talk about. I actually could talk for hours about what boundaries are because they're so important. I find them to be one of the most important things that we need to establish in our lives, but we've never learned about them directly. I've never was taught what a boundary is. I may have picked it up indirectly by some people. So the sooner you learn about them, the better, right? So I'm more interested in, and possibly this for our next, the next time we gather, exploring why it's so hard for people to set boundaries. Like, what do we think it's saying, and what makes it so scary and difficult, and the difference between a boundary and needing someone to fill an emotional need, right? One thing has nothing to do with another. So boundary talk is, I love it. I think it's important if we could educate and encourage the world, one person at a time, to take a look at their boundaries. We will be minimizing the amount of tensions out there in the world. We'd be minimizing the amount of need for people to stay in the victim mentality, in the martyrism that goes on, and just we'll be a lot healthier in the long run. But people don't know your boundaries unless you tell them what they are. People do not read minds and don't know what you need unless you are fully able to tell them and establish it. So, Brett, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I'm curious because we talk about a handbook. So going out to everybody, right? Throwing a question out there, a handbook. If there was like some kind of book put together on just pages labeled boundary, so you learn what your boundaries are or the different categories that we talk about. If there was something put together just outlining something, is that something that would be useful? So throwing something out there and just curious what you guys have to say and what you guys think. Um, if there was some kind of an outline that you could scroll through and write your own pieces down to learn more about who you are and what's important to you. Like, would something like that be useful? So I'm putting that question out there and hopefully I'll see some kind of response like, hey, yes, no, or what are you talking about? No way, get out of here. Whatever it is, it's all welcome.
Thank you, Brett. And you might get it whether you want it or not, because this is a little pet project of Erica's and mine, which we would welcome feedback and interest in. So, uh, well primed, Brett. Thank you. I think for me, self-awareness, communication, and discernment are probably three key things that came up for me there. Erica, I think you wanted to add.
I just am making an appeal to our listeners and our viewers there to please somebody comment in response, because Brett is desperate for somebody to just interact with us. So please, people, give us a comment. Brett wants to
Well,
talk. Brett likes to talk. So somebody respond.
I might even cut that clip and add it to all of our future Wi-Fi chats. It can be like our official ending. Thank you, our conversationalists. I called you chatters earlier. I don't know if it was entirely proper. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, our listener. There's 57 of you. You're not alone. For still tuning in. Anything anybody else would like to say before we wrap it up? See you next time.
Thanks for listening.